What is up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Kingfish Outdoors. My name's Chris, and I've got a little bit of a different video in store for you today. I'm going to show you all of the most important fishing knots and easy-to-tie rigs that you can use to catch more fish this coming spring. I did get out there and fish pretty hard this week and explored some new places, but I found the bite to still be pretty slow. Spring has not quite gotten into full effect yet, so we are still waiting for those fish to turn on. Alright, let's get started. First things first, any good fishing rig starts with some decent quality line. I personally prefer to use braided fishing line paired with a fluorocarbon leader. I use this for a couple of different reasons. First off, braid is very strong, thin, and has no memory or stretch to it. So I personally find it easier to handle. I get good strong hook sets into fish, and I have less trouble getting it unsnagged if I ever get my lure hung up underwater. I almost always tip my braid with some fluorocarbon leader as it has some very strong advantages. Braid is a little bit visible in the water as compared to something like this, which is almost invisible to fish. So this provides a much more subtle presentation. It's also abrasion resistant, so if you're fishing around heavy structure like rocks or submerged trees, this will help prevent break-offs. We are going to get started with my number one most used fishing knot, which is the Palomar knot. This knot is strong, easy to tie, and tends to work best with braided fishing lines or lines that are a little bit thinner. For the Palomar knot, we're going to start by taking our line and running it directly through the eye of the hook, pulling it through so you have some room to work with, and then taking that tag end and running it right back through the eyelet so that way you have your hook on a little loop like this. You could just run a loop directly through the eye of the hook, but that can be a little tricky sometimes, so I find doing it in two steps to be a little bit quicker. We're then going to keep those two lines parallel, and as if they were one line, tie a simple overhand knot, just like if you were tying your shoes. Pull it tight, and then we're going to take that loop that we have left over, and we're going to pull our hook or lure right through the loop. We can then take our tag ends and pull them tight. We got a nice firm knot that's wrapped around the eyelet twice to keep it strong. Then we can take that tag end that we're left over and give it a trim pretty close to the knot, and you are ready to fish. Up next is the Uni Knot, which I find to work best with fluorocarbon and monofilament line, but for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to use this braid because it shows up a little bit better on camera. To start, we are going to run our main line right through the eye of our hook and give ourselves a nice long tag end to work with. And then we're going to wrap it back around to be parallel with our main line. Once we are parallel, our tag end is going to make a little U-turn, and then it's going to go across until we have this formation. So this tag end right here is going to go under those two lines and wrap through that loop 5 or so times. So I'm going to get the setup kind of pinched in my thumb, and I go around the back of those two lines and through this loop 4 or 5 times. Now, the thicker the line is, the less wraps you'll need to do, but I wouldn't do any less than 4. 4 seems to be a good spot for those thicker lines, and for thinner lines, you can maybe do 5 to 7. All right, we've got some wraps in there. So once we've got our line wraps kind of set up, we're going to cinch it down. Pulling on the main line will get it closer to the eye of the hook, and then when you pull on both the tag and the main line, that will fully cinch the knot down onto the hook. And notice it kind of has looped on top of itself. Looks like a neat little beehive coiled over, and that's what you want the final knot to look like. You can then trim off the tag end with your line cutters, nice and close to the knot, and you are ready to fish. So we now need some way to connect our braided main line to our fluorocarbon leader. My favorite knot for this is the FG knot because it's very thin and strong and you can cast it through the guides without causing any trouble or getting snagged. We're going to start by leaning our fishing pole up against something where it won't fall over. And then I'm going to take my braided main line and I'm actually going to wrap it around my pinky like this a bunch of times. Just keep on wrapping it until it's not going to move anywhere and you've got the line under tension. Yeah, the tension is very important because that's what helps us tie this knot. So then I'm going to take my fluorocarbon leader, which I've got set aside. This is pretty thin, it's 12 pounds, so I hope it shows up okay on camera. We are going to lay it across our braided main line. Oops. We're going to lay our fluorocarbon leader across our braided main line. And then we are going to wrap it around the back once. And this will actually create a tiny loop of the braid that goes around the leader. So we're going to take that tag end and we're going to go under this time. Inside there and under, and that loops around again. And then over to loop and under to loop. And you're going to keep repeating this process of over and under loops about 20 to 25 times is how many times I usually do it. Thinner braid doesn't create a wrap as quickly, so I usually do more wraps on thinner braid. So you just keep on looping, and over time that little knot there will grow bigger and longer. All right, once you're satisfied with your number of wraps and you've got a knot that looks a little bit like that, we are going to start securing it by taking our tag end, which we've taken off our pinky. We're going to make a little loop with it, cross it over, so it's laying over the top of both our tag end and our main line. And then we're going to bring our tag end through that loop. This is called the half hitch, and we're actually going to do a couple of these to secure our knot. There we go. There's that half hitch. Gonna cinch it down. Now that we've got it secured with one half hitch, I'm gonna take the leader and the main line and I'm gonna pull them a bit to get that braided line that's wrapped around the leader really cinched down and digging into the leader so it does not move anywhere and forms a nice strong connection. Gonna get that tag end one more time. And this tag end, we're gonna do another several half hitches. So we, again, create that loop, bring the tag end around, making sure that it's wrapping around both the main line and the tag end of the leader, and then we just pull it through. And cinch it all the way down, making sure that it's landing on top. Looking good. At this point, I like to take my line cutters and I'm going to snip the leader line as close to the end of the knot as I can, like that. And then we're going to finish it with one more half hitch to cover that little nub and make it nice and smooth. Through the loop, cinch it down, and putting it right on top to cap off the knot. Then we've got one more tag end from our main braided line that we can snip pretty close to the knot, but not all the way up against it. And now your leader is connected to your braid with a very strong and thin knot that you can cast through the guides without it getting snagged. Now that we've gotten all the knots out of the way, I'm going to show you some of the most commonly used fishing rigs to cover a wide variety of situations out on the water. First off is the Texas rig. All you need for this is a worm and a hook. The weight is completely optional, and I'll show you what this bead is for in just a second. To begin, this orange bead represents a bobber stopper, which comes in a package just like this, and you can thread this on your line at the very beginning to prevent your bullet weight from sliding up and down to keep your bait all in line with itself. This part is completely optional, but I like to show it off just in case if you'd like to use it. So we're going to start by sliding that bead on there. And then we're also going to take our weight, which is optional as well, depending on the conditions you're fishing. And now I'm going to connect this worm hook to my fishing line, probably with a Palomar knot, since this line is a little bit thinner. Now that I've got my worm hook tied on my line with a Palomar knot, it's time to add the worm to the hook. I'm going to start by poking the hook point right dead center in the end of the worm. And once you hit the bend, that is where we want to poke the hook out of the side. We're going to take that worm and push it all the way up the shank of the hook until you actually cover up the eye and the knot, so that way the line just kind of disappears straight into the bait, like so. And then we're going to see where the bait lines up with the point of the hook, pinch the worm at that spot, push the hook point all the way through the bait, and now you've got the perfect Texas rig with a nice lined up presentation. The weight can slide down and be held in place by the bobber stop, and now it's complete. This is also a weedless presentation where the hook point is unlikely to get snagged if you're fishing near grass. This is one of the most versatile rigs in all of bass fishing. Another commonly fished rig for both artificials and bait is the Dropshot. Here's how to tie it. First, we're going to take our worm hook and we're going to attach it to our line using a Palomar knot. And we're going to make sure to leave an extra long tag end because the weight is going to go at the end of the tag end for this rig. All right, let's get this attached with a Palomar knot. And just a reminder, you're going to have to start with the hook upside down because the knot will flip the hook, and we want the hook in this orientation for the rig. We want the hook set to go up into the fish's roof of the mouth. All right, I've got my worm hook Palomar knotted on with the main line going up and an extra long tag end going down. As you can see, it's nice and snugly on there with the worm hook pointed up, so that way we can hook set into their mouth. Now, I'm just going to do a very simple Palomar knot to attach my weight to the end of my line. Now that the Palomar knot is added, the rig is complete, and all you have to do is Texas rig the worm onto the hook, and you are ready to fish. The finished effect of the rig is as the weight hangs down here, you can jiggle this worm up above it in the water column, and this just drives bass wild. The last rig I'm going to show you today is the Carolina/Fish Finder rig. This can be used with either bait or artificials, but is more commonly used with bait. First, you slide an egg sinker onto your main line with a little bead underneath it to protect the knot. Then you take your main line and Palomar knot it to a swivel. Then you can uni knot your swivel to some leader. This happens to be some heavy fluoro. Put a good amount of leader, and then you can uni knot that to your bait hook. This is a bottom presentation where that egg weight will keep your bait on the bottom, but your leader will give it lots of action and room to flow in the current, or if it's live bait, swim on its own. This rig can also be used to drag the weight through mud along the bottom to stir it up with a lure on the end, which can be done sometimes for bass. That is the Carolina/Fish Finder rig. Here's an example of a Carolina rig with a lure. I've got this kind of banana-shaped weight, my leader leading all the way to a little lure, a little soft plastic in this case on a jig head. This would drag through the mud and stir it up while this trails behind it and draws in strikes. Now that we've covered knots and rigs, here are a couple of key tips that will keep you going out on the water. The best practice for fishing rigs is just keeping it simple. You don't need a bunch of extra terminal tackle unless you're in a specific situation. Especially avoid these pre-made rigs with all this extra stuff like you can buy at Walmart. These are generally low quality and won't help you catch any more fish. You'll always need to have some basic tools on hand, namely line cutters, pliers, and gloves or fish grips. These are essential for handling fish, of course, if they're spiny or slimy. These will help you bend hooks back into shape or get them out of stubborn fish's mouths. And line cutters are the MVP. Having something with a serrated edge like this is particularly good for cutting braided line. These snips are very nice to have. My final tip is to match your tackle to the size of the bait you're using or the fish you're targeting. You can also make adjustments based on the conditions, such as heavy structure or fast-moving current. Alright guys, that's all I've got for today, but I hope you found that information helpful so you can get on those big ones this spring. Tight lines, and I'll see you in the next one.